What is the true cost of a dream? We talk about sacrifice, about hard work, about late nights and early mornings. But we rarely talk about the silent partner in every success story, the one who holds the flashlight in the dark, who patches up the wounds, who quietly bleeds their own ambitions so another's can flourish. For 6 years, I was that silent partner. I was the architect of a future I would never live in, the foundation of a house from which I would be evicted. I thought our dreams were intertwined, two saplings growing into a single, mighty tree. I was wrong. I was the soil, and he was the tree, and when he was tall enough to reach the sun, he saw no more use for the dirt that nurtured his roots. He looked at me one day, in the home my labor paid for, and told me I was simple. He said my existence disgusted him. That I was not worthy of the life he had built. The life I had built. The divorce papers arrived like a final verdict on my worth. But he made one fatal mistake. He forgot about the paper trail. He forgot about the promises etched in ink, buried in a box of memories I was too heartbroken to throw away. He forgot that the quiet, tired woman he was so eager to discard was the same woman who had spent 6 years learning how to fight. And the battlefield he chose was a courtroom, where the truth is the only currency that matters. Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever given your all, only to be told it was nothing? Then stay with me. This is not just my story. This is a testament for every person who has ever been taken for granted. This is what happens when the silent partner finds her voice. The air in courtroom 4B was a thick, soupy mixture of old wood, lemon-scented polish, and the faint, metallic tang of central heating. It was the smell of bureaucracy and broken hearts. I sat at the cold, laminated oak table, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that the bones ached. My fingers, usually busy scanning groceries or balancing heavy trays, had developed a life of their own, a fine, constant tremor that I could neither still nor hide. I focused on the grain of the wood in front of me, tracing the swirling patterns as if they were a map that could lead me out of this nightmare. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a dull, monotonous tune, casting a harsh, blue-white glow that made everyone look slightly ill. It was an unforgiving light, and I felt its judgment keenly. It highlighted the frayed cuff of my blouse, a cheap polyester thing I'd bought for this very occasion, and the slight scuff on the toe of my only pair of dress shoes. It was a light that worshipped sharp lines and expensive fabrics, and I had neither. Across the expanse of polished floor, Brandon sat with his lawyer. They were a study in calculated power. The lawyer, a man introduced as Mr. Thorne, was a shark in a $5,000 suit. His hair was a perfect silver helmet, his posture ramrod straight. Every movement, from the way he adjusted his cufflinks to the way he leaned to whisper to Brandon, was a performance of effortless superiority. And then there was Brandon. Dr. Brandon Pierce. My husband. The words felt foreign and bitter in my mind. He looked like a museum piece version of the man I'd married, restored and placed behind glass. His suit was a masterpiece of tailoring, a deep charcoal gray that seemed to absorb the ugly light and reflect back only sophistication. A heavy, platinum watch glinted on his wrist, a tiny, flashing monument to his success. He sat perfectly still, his posture relaxed, one hand resting casually on the table. He looked bored. Profoundly, insultingly bored, as if the dissolution of our 8-year marriage was a minor administrative task he was eager to check off his list. A gentle, persistent pressure under the table broke my spiraling panic. Maggie, my best friend since we were 7 years old and built forts out of sofa cushions, squeezed my hand. Her grip was firm, an anchor in the stormy sea of my anxiety. She was my lawyer, but more than that, she was my witness. She was the keeper of my history, the one who had seen the late-night tears, the exhaustion, the slow, painful erosion of my spirit. She'd taken my case the moment I'd called her, sobbing and broken on my bathroom floor. "Not a chance, Chloe," she'd said, her voice steely over the phone. "He doesn't get to do this. We're going to war." The sharp, authoritative crack of the judge's gavel snapped me back to the present. This court is now in session. The Honorable Judith Henderson presiding. Judge Henderson took her seat on the high bench. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a face that looked like it had seen every conceivable human drama and had developed a permanent layer of skepticism as a result. Her eyes, a piercing shade of blue-gray, were sharp and missed nothing. Her silver hair was pulled back into a tight, no-nonsense bun that seemed to pull the skin of her forehead taut. She radiated an aura of formidable intelligence and zero tolerance for nonsense. "Counsel," she said, her voice a low, clear alto that required no microphone. "You may begin." Mr. Thorne stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a smooth, practiced motion that was surely rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Thank you, Your Honor." He paced slowly before the bench, a panther establishing its territory. "My client, Dr. Brendan Pierce, is a man who has achieved the pinnacle of professional success through his own exceptional intellect, relentless drive, and tireless dedication. He graduated top of his class from the prestigious Northwood Medical School and is now a leading cardiothoracic surgeon at Metropolitan Elite Hospital, where he saves lives on a daily basis." He paused, letting the impressive titles hang in the air like expensive cologne. I felt a phantom ache in my lower back, a memory of the countless hours I'd spent on my feet, supporting that relentless drive. During the course of his marriage to the petitioner, Thorne continued, his tone dipping into a subtle, condescending dismissiveness that was somehow more insulting than outright hostility, Ms. Morrison worked a series of transient, low-skilled jobs: cashier, waitress, cleaning lady. These positions contributed only minimally to the household finances while my client was undertaking the Herculean task of his medical education and the founding of his career. The words were like individual lashes from a whip. Low-skilled. Minimally contributing. Each one landed on a different, tender part of my soul. I saw the ghost of my reflection in the grimy window of the 4 a.m. bus I took to my cleaning job. I felt the perpetual ache in my shoulders from carrying heavy trays. I smelled the faint, clinging scent of fryer grease and floor wax that seemed to have become a part of me. To him, it was a list of my inadequacies. To me, it was the biography of my love. Mr. Thorne paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Ms. Morrison, while undoubtedly a pleasant and well-meaning individual, never pursued any meaningful career development or education of her own. She possesses no college degree, no specialized skills, and has accumulated no significant assets or savings. She is, for all intents and purposes, in the same financial position she was in 8 years ago. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. It was true. On paper, I was the same 20-year-old girl who had dropped out of college. He made it sound like a personal failing, not a conscious choice made for the benefit of the man now sitting across from me, pretending I was a stranger. In light of these facts, Thorne said, pulling a document from his sleek leather portfolio, my client is requesting that this divorce be settled with all due speed and efficiency. He has generously offered Ms. Morrison a modest transitional alimony payment of $1,000 per month for a period of 24 months. This is, we believe, more than fair and even compassionate, considering she made no direct financial investment in Dr. Pierce's education or career advancement. No direct financial investment. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. I felt dizzy, the room tilting slightly. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, the sharp, coppery taste of blood a grounding, painful anchor in the sea of his lies. How could he? How could Brendan sit there, in his bespoke suit, and let this narrative be spun? This man who had eaten the food I paid for, who had slept in the apartments my rent money secured, who had read the textbooks my labor purchased. I risked a glance at him. He was nodding along, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his chin, his face a cold, handsome mask of agreement. This was the man who used to weep with gratitude in my arms after a particularly grueling exam, who used to kiss my chapped, work-roughened hands and swear that every callus was a medal of honor, a testament to a love so profound it could move mountains. Furthermore, Thorne said, his voice taking on a note of finality, in a gesture of almost excessive goodwill, Dr. Pierce has offered to allow Ms. Morrison to keep her personal belongings and her vehicle, a 2015 Honda Civic with significant mileage and, I might add, a persistent issue with the passenger side window. He asks for nothing from her, as she has nothing of value to offer. He simply wishes to move forward with his life and his important work, unencumbered. Nothing of value to offer. The words were the final, shattering blow. Something deep within me, something that had been bending for years under the weight of exhaustion and diminishing self-worth, finally snapped. It wasn't a loud break, but a quiet, fundamental realignment. 6 years. 6 years of my life, my youth, my health, my own education, all poured into the vessel of his ambition. And I was left with nothing of value. The injustice of it was a cold fire, crystallizing in my veins, replacing the panic with something else, something harder, a fierce, burning resolve. I looked at Maggie. Her jaw was set so tight I could see the muscle twitching. Her eyes, usually warm and laughing, were narrowed into slits of pure, undiluted fury. She was not just my lawyer now, she was my avenging angel, and she was ready to unleash hell. When Mr. Thorne finally sat down, looking immensely pleased with his own performance, Maggie rose. Her movement was calm, deliberate, a stark contrast to his theatrical pacing. She didn't button a jacket or adjust a tie. She simply stood, a pillar of quiet strength in a simple, dark pantsuit. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "If I may, I would like to present evidence that directly contradicts, and in fact, completely dismantles the fictional narrative of this marriage we have just been presented with." Judge Henderson peered over the top of her glasses, her expression unreadable. "Proceed, Ms. Reed." Maggie turned to me. She didn't smile, but her eyes held a world of confidence and a silent command, "Steady. This is our time." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. This was it. The moment we had spent weeks preparing for, the moment that would change everything. My heart hammered against my ribs like a wild thing trying to escape its cage. I felt lightheaded. I focused on Maggie's calm presence, on the weight of the truth we carried. I reached down to the worn leather bag at my feet, my fingers closing around the cool, smooth surface of a simple manila envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. Inside was not just paper. Inside was the ghost of the girl I had been, bright-eyed, hopeful, in love. Inside were every missed class, every unpaid bill I'd fretted over, every silent tear shed in the shower so Brendan wouldn't see, every hopeful "I love you" whispered in the dark of our tiny apartment. It was a ledger of a life lived for someone else, and it was about to become the most powerful weapon in the room. I stood, my legs feeling like they were made of water and sawdust. The courtroom was utterly silent, the only sound the soft, shameful scuff of my cheap shoes on the polished floor. I could feel Brandon's gaze on me, a confused, slightly irritated stare, as if I were a minor nuisance interrupting his schedule. I could feel the curiosity from the gallery, where a handful of observers sat, including Veronica Ashford. I saw her out of the corner of my eye, impeccably dressed in a tailored cream-colored coat, her face a perfect mask of composed indifference, though I noticed her fingers were tightly clenched around the handle of her designer handbag. I walked the seemingly endless distance to the judge's bench. Each step felt like a mile. Judge Henderson watched me approach, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. I held out the envelope. It trembled in my hand. She took it with a professional nod, her fingers brushing against mine. For a fleeting second, our eyes met, and I saw not pity, but a spark of keen interest. A silent understanding passed between us. I turned and walked back to my seat, my back straight, my head high. I did not look at Brandon. I focused on the judge, on the envelope in her hands, on the future that was now hurtling toward us. She opened the metal clasp with a quiet click that echoed in the silence. She slid the contents out, a thick sheaf of papers, a collection of our shared history rendered in cold, hard, undeniable facts. She began to read, her face a neutral mask of judicial scrutiny. She flipped the first page, her eyes scanning the lines. Then the second. Her eyebrows, perfectly shaped and silvered like her hair, crept slowly upward. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, widened a fraction. She glanced up, her gaze sweeping over Brandon in his expensive suit, then dropped back to the papers, reading more intently now. She read further, and then, her lips, which had been set in a firm, disapproving line, began to twitch. She pressed them together, as if fighting a smile, a battle she was visibly losing. She reached the final page, a single sheet that held a particular, explosive significance. She read it slowly, then once more, her head tilting slightly to the side. And then it happened. Judge Henderson laughed. It wasn't a polite, suppressed chuckle. It wasn't a quiet giggle. It was a full, rich, genuine laugh that erupted from her and echoed through the stunned silence of the courtroom. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated astonishment and amusement. She put a hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking, her eyes crinkling at the corners as tears of mirth welled up. She looked from the papers to Brendan, and that seemed to set her off again, a fresh wave of laughter leaving her wiping her eyes with a delicate finger. I had never seen anything like it in my life. It was surreal. The formal, imposing atmosphere of the courtroom was shattered by this human, utterly unexpected sound. Brendan's mask of bored confidence shattered into 1,000 pieces. He leaned forward, his brow furrowed in confusion and dawning alarm. "What? What is it?" he whispered, his voice too loud in the quiet. His lawyer, Mr. Thorne, was frantically whispering in his ear, his own composure visibly fraying, his face flushed with confusion and anger. In the gallery, I saw Veronica Ashford shift uncomfortably, her perfectly composed face now etched with sharp worry. The indifference was gone, replaced by the cold fear of someone watching a carefully laid plan implode. Judge Henderson finally composed herself, though a faint, wicked smile still played on her lips. She looked directly at Brendan, and her amusement had been replaced by something far colder, far more dangerous. It was the look a seasoned predator gives its prey just before the strike. "Mr. Pierce," she said, and her voice had the sharp, cold edge of a freshly honed blade. "In 20 years of presiding over this court, I have never, and I mean never, seen such a clear-cut case of, well, we'll get to the legal terminology momentarily. But I must say, your audacity is truly remarkable." Brendan's face went ashen. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking suddenly small and very, very vulnerable in his expensive suit. He had no idea what was in that envelope. He had been so sure of his victory, so convinced of his own narrative, that the possibility of a counteroffensive had never crossed his mind. But I knew. I knew about the $45,000 loan, the promissory note, the 6 years of bank statements, the $75,000 transfer to Veronica. And in that moment, watching the foundation of his perfect new life crack and splinter under the weight of his own forgotten promises, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt since the day he walked out on our anniversary: power. It was a quiet, thrumming, ferocious power. And it was all mine. Narrator pause. Can you imagine the tension in that room? The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of a man who believed he held all the cards, suddenly realizing the game has been rigged against him from the start. But what was in that envelope? What truth was so potent, so undeniable, that it could make a hardened judge laugh out loud in disbelief? Trust me, the details are more shocking than you can imagine. We're about to rewind the tape, back to the very beginning, to a time when love was a currency more valuable than gold, and a promise was a bond meant to last a lifetime. Don't go anywhere, because the story of how we got here is just as gripping as the courtroom drama. And hey, if you're already hooked, if you're already feeling that simmering anger on Chloe's behalf, do us a favor, smash that like button, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of betrayal and breathtaking justice. Now, let's go back to the start. 8 years ago, Brendan and I lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of the city, in a building that listed slightly to the left if you stood in the right spot. Apartment 3B. I can still smell it, a unique blend of old carpet, the neighbor's perpetual cabbage soup, and the faint, metallic scent of the radiator that hissed and clanged like a dying dragon all winter long. The place was so small we had to do a complicated dance to pass each other in the hallway. The paint in the bathroom was a masterpiece of neglect, bubbling and peeling in a map of water damage. The kitchen had exactly 4 cabinets, one of which was permanently wedged shut, and a linoleum floor so worn you could see the wood beneath in patches. The single-bedroom window had a hairline crack we dutifully sealed with duct tape every November, a ritual as sure as Thanksgiving. But to us, it was a palace. It was our palace. We were 22 and 20, dizzyingly in love, and drunk on the cheap wine of possibility. We'd gotten married at the courthouse on a rainy Tuesday in April. My dress was a simple, knee-length white sundress I'd found on a clearance rack for $19. His suit was borrowed from his more successful cousin, Leo, and the sleeves were a fraction too short. Maggie was my maid of honor, wearing a bright yellow dress that was like a splash of sunshine in the drab government building. Brandon's cousin was the best man. We said our vows in front of a bored-looking clerk, our voices echoing in the empty room. Afterwards, we went to our favorite diner, the Sunrise Grill, and ordered burgers, fries, and chocolate milkshakes. We couldn't afford champagne. It was the most perfect, unscripted, and joyful day of my life. Brandon had just been accepted into Northwood Medical School. It was all he'd ever wanted, the culmination of a dream born from tragedy. When he was 12, he'd watched his beloved grandfather slowly succumb to a degenerative heart condition. He'd told me once, his voice thick with a memory that never faded, the surgeons gave him 6 months. He lived for 2 more years. They gave him time. They gave us memories. I want to do that. I want to give people time. He was going to save lives. He had the brains, the drive, the empathy. He just needed the ticket in. I was in my sophomore year of college, studying communications. I didn't have a single, burning passion like Brandon did, but I loved the swirl of ideas. I loved learning about media theory, about the power of language to shape perception, about public relations and the art of the story. I had dreams, too vague, shimmering things about working for a nonprofit, or maybe in publishing, using words to make a difference. They were quiet dreams, but they were mine. And they were about to be put on hold. The reality of medical school finances hit us not like a freight train, but like a slow, rising flood, creeping under the door and slowly drowning us. It was about 2 months into his first semester. We were sitting at our rickety, second-hand kitchen table, a sea of past due notices, tuition statements, and textbook invoices spread out before us like a map of our impending failure. The numbers were a sickening shade of red. "Chloe," Brandon said, running his hands through his already messy hair, a gesture of stress I would come to know more intimately than my own reflection. I don't know how we're going to do this. The tuition alone is a nightmare, but the books, they want $800 for the anatomy textbooks this semester. $800. For pictures of dead people. And that's just for one class. Then there's the lab fees, the health insurance, and we still have to pay rent, and the electric bill is overdue, and his part-time job at the campus library paid a pittance, barely covering his bus pass and lunches. My work-study at the Save Mart supermarket barely covered our grocery bill. The student loans he'd secured covered most of the tuition but left nothing for the crushing, mundane weight of rent, utilities, and the basic, brutal cost of existing. The dream was turning into a financial monster, and it was eating us alive. I looked at the numbers until they blurred into a red haze of panic. I looked at Brendan's face, usually so bright with confidence, now etched with a fear I'd never seen before. The dream he'd worked his whole life for was slipping through his fingers before it even began. He was looking at a cliff edge, and I was standing behind him. "Brendan," I said, my voice quiet but unnervingly steady in the storm of our anxiety. "What if I took a year off? Just 1 year. I can work full-time. Maybe even get a second job. We can get through medical school, and once you start your residency, the stipend will help, and I can go back and finish my degree. It's just a pause." He looked up, his eyes bloodshot from late-night studying and now, from panic. "No. Absolutely not, Chloe. I can't ask you to do that. It's not fair. It's my dream, my responsibility. I'll get more loans. I'll take a heavier course load and graduate faster." "You're already taking the maximum course load," I said softly. "And more loans? Brandon, you're already in so deep. The interest alone. You're not asking, I said, reaching across the table, navigating around a pile of bills, to take his hand. His fingers were ice cold. I'm offering. Brendan, being a doctor is your dream. You've wanted this since you were a kid. It's who you are. Communications. I like it, but I can do that anytime. It's flexible. You can't put medical school on hold. If you defer now, you might never go back. The momentum will be gone. I won't let that happen. I love you too much to let that happen. We talked all night. The conversation cycled through stages of grief. He protested, he bargained, he got angry at the injustice of it all, he sank into a despair so profound it scared me. But we both knew, in the quiet, desperate part of our hearts, that there was no other way. There was no fairy godmother, no sudden inheritance. There was just us, and the grim, mathematical truth of our bank statement. The following week, with a hollow, sinking feeling in my chest that felt like grief, I went to the university registrar's office. The woman behind the counter had kind eyes and a tired smile. Taking a break, honey? She asked, her voice gentle. Just for a year, I said, the words feeling like a lie on my tongue. Maybe 2. She nodded, her eyes full of a pity that made my cheeks burn. She'd seen this story before. She stamped my withdrawal forms, and just like that, my name was taken off the class rosters. My student ID, which I'd been so proud to get, became worthless. I walked out of the building feeling like I had amputated a part of myself. The week after that, I got a full-time job as a cashier at Save Mart, working the 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift. The manager, a gruff man named Stan with a permanent coffee stain on his tie, barely looked at my application. You show up on time, you don't steal, you're hired, he grunted. The following Saturday, I started waiting tables at the Midnight Grill, a 24-hour diner that smelled of stale coffee, grease, and desperation. The night shift was brutal, but the tips were slightly better. In the beginning, it was almost romantic, this shared struggle. I'd come home, bone-tired, my feet screaming, my back a solid knot of pain, and Brandon would be waiting for me. He'd have the one comfy chair warmed up for me. He'd make me a cup of tea, exactly how I liked it, and he'd kneel on the floor and massage my aching feet while I told him stories about the coupon ladies who argued over expired discounts or the drunk, philosophical truckers at the diner. He'd help with the laundry, he'd cook dinner on the weekends, simple things like spaghetti or grilled cheese, and he'd hold me so tightly at night it felt like his love could fuse my broken pieces back together. His gratitude was a tangible thing, a warm blanket around my shoulders. This is just for a little while, Chloe, he'd whisper into my hair, his breath warm and familiar against my scalp. Just a few more years. I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. When I'm a doctor, I'll take care of you. You'll never have to work a day like this again. I'll give you the world. I promise. And I believed him. With every fiber of my being, I believed him. His dreams felt like my dreams. His success would be our success. His gratitude was my fuel. But medical school wasn't 2 years. It was 4 years of relentless, soul-crushing studying, followed by a residency that was even more demanding, both in hours and emotional toll. The few more years began to stretch into an endless, dark tunnel. By his second year, my 2 jobs weren't enough. The financial pressure mounted, a constant, grinding weight. His textbooks were a constant, staggering expense, hundreds of dollars for a single volume that he needed for a single semester. He needed a new laptop that could handle complex medical imaging software, his old one kept crashing. He needed professional clothes for his clinical rotations. You can't show up in jeans and a hoodie, Chloe, it's a hospital, not a frat house. First impressions matter. So, I picked up a 3rd job. For nights a week, from 8 p.m. until midnight, I cleaned offices in the Prestige Plaza high-rise downtown. It was ironic, spending my nights wiping down the desks and vacuuming the carpets of people who made in an hour what I made in a week. My life became a grueling, soul-crushing cycle, a hamster wheel of exhaustion. My schedule was a study in sleep deprivation. 5 a.m., wake up. Shower. Pull on my Save Mart vest. 5:45 a.m., catch the first bus of the day. 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., scan groceries, bag produce, smile until my face ached. 3:30 p.m., get home. Collapse on the couch for a 1-hour nap if I was lucky. More often, I just stare at the ceiling, too tired to sleep. 4:30 p.m., change into my cleaning uniform, a pair of old jeans and a t-shirt. 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., clean offices. Empty trash cans. Wipe down surfaces with harsh chemicals that made my eyes water and my throat raw. Scrub toilets. The work was mind-numbing and physically punishing. 9:30 p.m., on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, I go straight from cleaning to the diner. 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., wait tables at the midnight grill. Serve coffee and greasy food to insomniacs, students, and lonely hearts. Smile for tips. 2:30 a.m., stumble home. Shower, trying to wash the smell of bleach, fryer grease, and other people's mess off my skin. 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., sleep. A fractured, unsatisfying sleep haunted by the sound of the alarm that was always just moments away. My body began to keep a ledger my mind refused to acknowledge. My hands, once soft, grew rough and calloused from cleaning chemicals and scouring pads. The skin around my nails was perpetually raw, cracked, and sometimes bleeding. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, my cheeks became hollow, my collarbones sharp, accusing ridges under my skin. I lived on cheap coffee, crackers, stolen bites of food from the diner, and the occasional piece of fruit I'd snagged from the Save Mart produce section before it was thrown out. The dark circles under my eyes became a permanent feature, like tattoos of exhaustion. My hair lost its shine, becoming limp and brittle. My world shrank to the size of my shifts. My college friends, Sarah and Jen, stopped calling. At first, they'd invite me to parties, to movies, to just hang out. I always said no. I have to work. After a while, the invitations stopped coming. I was a ghost in their lives. My world was Brandon, work, and sleep. There was no room for anything else, not even for me. But Brandon was thriving. He was at the top of his class, dazzling his professors with his insights, receiving glowing reviews from his rotations. He'd come home buzzing with excitement about a rare procedure he'd observed or a diagnosis he'd helped nail down. And for a long time, he still seemed to love me. He still said thank you when I handed him an envelope of cash, my tips, my pain, converted into his books. He'd hug me and tell me I was amazing. He still held me when we both finally fell into bed, his body a warm comfort against my perpetual chill. The first crack, a hairline fracture in our foundation, appeared during his 3rd year. He was accepted into a prestigious, highly competitive cardiology track. Suddenly, he was orbiting a different universe. His classmates in this elite group were different. They came from old money, from families of doctors and lawyers who funded their education and their lifestyles without a second thought. Their partners were investment bankers, corporate lawyers, trust fund babies. They wore clothes that didn't come from a discount rack, took ski trips to Aspen, and talked about their summer homes with a casual familiarity that was alien to me. One night, he came home from a study group at a classmate's penthouse apartment overlooking the river. I was on the couch, still in my Save Mart vest, eating a bowl of cereal for dinner because the thought of standing at the stove was physically nauseating. "Chloe," he said, not with a greeting, but with a critical once-over that started at my messy ponytail and ended at my scuffed sneakers. "Why do you always wear that thing when you're home?" I looked down, confused. "My vest? I just got off my shift. I have to be at the office building in an hour." "I know, but..." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Don't you want to look nice sometimes? For yourself? Put on a little makeup? A nice dress?" The question hung in the air, laced with a strange new disapproval that felt like a splash of cold water. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Brendan, when would I have time to look nice? And for what? To scrub toilets? Who am I trying to impress? The janitor's closet. He didn't answer. He just shook his head, a faint, disappointed look on his face, and went to the bedroom, leaving me sitting there in my blue vest, my cereal suddenly tasting like ash. The comment festered. I started noticing the subtle shifts, the tiny betrayals. The way he'd subtly turn his head when I tried to kiss him goodbye in the morning, as if my blue vest was a mark of shame he didn't want to be associated with. The way he stopped inviting me to medical school mixers and department parties. It'll just be boring shop talk, Chloe. You'd be miserable. It's all people talking about their research grants and their publications. The way his compliments became backhanded critiques. You have such a pretty face, you know, if you just did something with your hair. Maybe you should try reading the newspaper more. Or The Economist. It's good to be informed about the world. It's important for conversation. During his 4th year, the comments lost their subtlety and became direct, unvarnished comparisons. He began to measure me against the ghosts of the women in his new world, and I was always found wanting. Jeremy's fiancée just made partner at her law firm. Can you imagine? At 30. She's so driven. Or, did you see what Dr. Henderson's wife was wearing at the annual banquet? A simple black Valentino dress. No jewelry. Just elegance. Now that's class. Or the one that cut the deepest, Veronica Ashford, she's an hospital admin, she was saying how she built her department's budget from the ground up. She has such a sharp, strategic mind. It's impressive. I tried. God, I tried so hard it felt like my soul was tearing. I bought the cheapest foundation and mascara I could find at the drugstore and practiced applying it at 3 a.m. during my break at the diner, using the greasy reflection in the kitchen door. I saved my tips for 2 entire months, foregoing new socks and lunches, to buy a single, simple black dress from a department store sale rack. It was my Veronica dress. I borrowed books on current events and world economics from the library and tried to absorb the information through a haze of exhaustion, hoping to have something intelligent to say on the rare, terrifying occasions he allowed me to accompany him to a function. But I was still working 3 jobs. I was still a ghost of myself, a shell running on caffeine and fear. No amount of cheap mascara could hide the hollow, tired look in my eyes, the look of someone who was slowly being erased. The dress hung on my thinning frame, a sad imitation of the elegance he craved. The worst part, the part that truly broke my heart piece by piece, was that Brendan stopped seeing my sacrifices. The thank yous dried up. The help around the apartment ceased entirely. My studies are too intense. Chloe, you have no idea the pressure I'm under. You understand. He started sleeping in the spare room, a glorified closet with a fold-out cot. Your alarm for your 5 a.m. shift wakes me up, and I need to be sharp for my surgeries. A single mistake could cost a life. The man who used to worship the ground I walked on, who used to kiss my rough hands as if they were made of the finest silk, now barely looked at them. He was already leaving me, he just hadn't found the courage, or the convenient excuse, to say the words out loud. He was shedding his old skin, and I was the part that wouldn't peel away cleanly. Can you feel it? The slow, painful, excruciating erosion of her spirit? Giving every last ounce of your energy, your youth, your very identity, only to be made to feel like you're an embarrassment, a burden, a piece of the past that no longer fits the future? It's a special kind of heartbreak, a death by 1,000 cuts. But Chloe was about to discover that the deepest cut, the most profound betrayal, was still to come. A betrayal that would involve a $45,000 secret, a signed piece of paper Brendan had long since forgotten, and a new woman who was everything he thought I wasn't. If you're feeling that simmering anger for Chloe right now, just wait. The plot is about to thicken in a way you will not see coming. Don't forget to comment "Justice for Chloe" down below. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. The most shocking part of the story is coming up right after this. Brendan's graduation day dawned with a sky so brilliantly blue and clear it felt like a personal mockery. I sat in the vast, echoing university auditorium, a single, frayed thread in a tapestry of proud families in their Sunday best. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, starched shirts, and unbridled ambition. When the dean finally called his name, Dr. Brendan Pierce, magna cum laude, a sound tore from my throat, a raw, guttural cry of victory that was lost in the wave of applause. I was on my feet, clapping so hard my palms stung, tears streaming down my face in a torrent I didn't even try to stem. This was it. The summit. The peak I had spent 6 years climbing, carrying both our loads. Every aching muscle, every sleepless night, every missed opportunity, every silent, swallowed dream, it had all been for this moment. I watched him cross the stage, his gait confident, his smile bright and easy, and I felt a love so profound it was almost painful. We did it, I thought, my heart hammering against my ribs. We actually did it. The reception was held in a sun-dappled courtyard, a world away from the cracked concrete and duct-taped windows of our apartment. The women wore floppy hats and linen dresses, the men wore boat shoes and casual blazers. I had spent 2 weeks' worth of my diner tips, money that should have gone to paying down our lingering credit card debt, on a simple, knee-length emerald green dress and a pair of nude heels from a discount store. The shoes were a half size too small and pinched my toes, but I told myself the pain was a penance, a final sacrifice. I'd spent an hour that morning carefully styling my hair, using a curling iron I'd borrowed from Maggie, and applying my practiced makeup. I wanted to look like I belonged next to him. I wanted him to look at me and see not the tired cashier, but the woman who had helped make him a doctor. I found him near the champagne fountain, holding court amidst a circle of his classmates and their polished, beaming families. He had a glass of champagne in his hand, and he was laughing at something a tall, silver-haired man had said. He looked like he'd been born into this world of easy confidence and clinking glasses. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and approached, my heart fluttering like a trapped bird. I gently touched his arm. "Congratulations, Dr. Pierce," I said, beaming up at him. He turned. And for a fraction of a second, a fleeting moment so brief I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, I saw it in his eyes, a flash of pure, unadulterated embarrassment. It was the look you'd give a distant, slightly eccentric relative who had shown up uninvited. It was there and gone, replaced by a cool, detached politeness. "Chloe." "Hey," he said, his voice flat. He didn't hug me. He didn't kiss my cheek. He didn't put his arm around me. He simply turned back to the group, effectively positioning me on the periphery. "Everyone, this is my wife, Chloe." A woman detached herself from the circle. She was tall, willowy, and dressed in a cream-colored linen suit that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek, low ponytail, and her makeup was flawless. "Veronica Ashford," she said, extending a hand with a perfect, pale pink manicure. Her hand was cool and dry, her grip firm. Her smile was brilliant and utterly cold, not reaching her eyes, which were the color of slate. "I'm in hospital administration at Metropolitan Elite. We've been trying to recruit your husband for months. He's quite the rising star." "Oh," I said, shaking her hand, acutely aware of my own short, unpolished nails, the skin around them still rough from cleaning chemicals. "That's wonderful. He's worked very hard." "Brendan is exceptionally talented," Veronica continued, her gaze sliding past me to lock onto him with an intensity that felt proprietary. "The compensation package we're discussing is extremely competitive. It includes a signing bonus that should take care of any lingering student debt." She said the last two words with a slight, condescending pause, as if they were something distasteful she'd found on her shoe. Another classmate, a guy named Thomas with a booming laugh, clapped Brendan on the back. "Pierce, you're set for life, man. Elite salary, elite reputation. You'll be playing golf with the chief of surgery by this time next year." Thomas's wife, a woman named Cynthia in a vibrant silk dress who had earlier been discussing the merits of various private preschools, gave me a slow, appraising once-over. Her smile was a thin, painted line. And you must be so relieved it's all over, Chloe, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. Brendan mentioned you've been holding down the fort. Retail, wasn't it? It must be so exhausting. The way she said retail made it sound like a communicable disease. The fort made our life sound like a quaint, rustic adventure. I worked several jobs, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. Whatever was needed to help. How industrious, Cynthia said, and immediately turned back to Veronica. Darling, you simply must tell me where you got that bag. Is that the new Celine? I stood there for 20 minutes, a ghost at the feast, smiling politely while conversations about hedge funds, ski trips to Zermatt, and the best Bordeaux vintages swirled around me. I was a spectator in my own husband's life. I tried to catch Brendan's eye, to share a private smile, a moment of "can you believe this?" but he was engrossed, laughing, networking. He belonged here. I was a tourist wearing the wrong clothes and speaking the wrong language. Finally, the pinching in my toes became a sharp, insistent pain. I touched Brendan's arm again. Brendan, I'm going to head home. I have a shift at the diner tonight. He frowned, the expression looking out of place on his smooth, happy face. Tonight? It's my graduation day. I know. I'm sorry, but I couldn't get anyone to cover, and we need the money. The words felt pathetic even as I said them. We need the money, he repeated, a strange, almost mocking tone in his voice. Chloe, I'm about to start making over $200,000 a year. Do you really need to keep waitressing? It's undignified. I stared at him, the air knocked out of me. Undignified. After 6 years of financial terror, of selling my dignity piece by piece to keep us afloat, he was now concerned with the dignity of my work? The work that had put the champagne in his hand and the designer suit on his back? Yes, I said, my voice tight, a thin wire of anger beginning to vibrate deep inside me. Until your first paycheck clears and we know we're stable, yes, I need to work. He sighed, a long-suffering sound, as if I were a stubborn child. Fine. I'll probably be out late anyway. Veronica invited a group of us to a celebration dinner at the Laurent. The Laurent was the most expensive restaurant in the city, a place I'd only read about in magazines. Veronica invited us? I asked, a sliver of hope piercing through the hurt. A group of us, yes, he said, not meeting my eyes. It's networking, Chloe. It's important for my career. You understand. I did understand. I understood perfectly. I went home alone. I took off the emerald green dress, hanging it carefully in the closet, and put on my stiff, black and white diner uniform. The polyester felt cheap and rough against my skin. That night, I served overcooked fries and watered-down coffee to people who barely saw me, the phantom laughter of Brendan and his new friends echoing in my ears. The contrast was so stark it was laughable. He was eating seared scallops at the Laurent, I was wiping ketchup off Formica at the Midnight Grill. 3 weeks later, he signed the contract with Metropolitan Elite. The starting salary was $225,000, plus a $30,000 signing bonus. When he told me, I actually sank to the floor in our living room and cried with relief. The weight of 6 years lifted off my shoulders in a single, glorious moment. Finally. Finally, I could quit my jobs. Finally, I could breathe. Finally, I could go back to school and reclaim the life I had put on hold. I could sleep. The thought of 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep felt more luxurious than any vacation. But Brendan had other plans. He came home a few days later, not with a plan for my future, but with glossy brochures for luxury high-rises in the coveted River District. We need to move, Chloe, he announced, spreading the brochures across our scratched kitchen table like a general plotting an invasion. This place, it's embarrassing. It's not appropriate for someone in my position. My colleagues all live in the River District. Image matters in my field. Perception is reality. I looked at the brochures. The rent on the cheapest one-bedroom was $4,000 a month, more than I made in 3 months at all my jobs combined. "Brendan, that's so expensive," I said, my voice faint. "Maybe we could find something nice but more reasonable? In a good neighborhood, but not that. Then I could quit working and go back to school. I could finally finish my degree." He looked at me as if I'd suggested we live in a dumpster. "Chloe, presentation is everything. Where we live, what we drive, the clubs we belong to, it all sends a message. I'm a surgeon at Elite, not a med student anymore. We need to look the part. Besides," he added, his tone shifting, "it's good for you to keep working. Independence is important for a woman. You don't want to be entirely dependent on me, do you?" Independence. He called my financial servitude independence. The goalposts had moved. First, my work was essential for our survival. Now, it was a character-building exercise to ensure I didn't become a burden. We moved to a sleek, soulless apartment in a glass and steel tower in the River District. The floors were polished concrete, the windows were floor-to-ceiling, and the view was of other identical glass and steel towers. It was cold and impersonal, a showroom, not a home. Brendan bought a black BMW 5 Series. He acquired a wardrobe of suits from a tailor whose name I couldn't pronounce. He joined an exclusive gym that cost $300 a month and talked about getting a membership at the downtown tennis club. And I kept working my 2 jobs. I'd quit the night cleaning job, but I still worked the cashier counter at Save Mart and the weekend shifts at the diner. Now, I was doing it to pay my share of a life I didn't want, watching my husband transform into a man I no longer recognized, a man who was embarrassed by the very jobs that had built him. The criticisms became a constant, low-grade hum in our home, the background music to my life. "Chloe, you need to update your wardrobe. Those jeans are looking a bit worn. Chloe, maybe try a different hairstyle. Something more sophisticated. Chloe, you should really read the Wall Street Journal. It's important to understand the market, especially with my new investment portfolio. Chloe, I can't take you to the hospital fundraiser. It's a black tie affair, and frankly, you wouldn't know how to navigate the conversation. These are major donors, not diner customers." And always, there was Veronica. Her name was a refrain in our apartment, a specter in our marriage. Veronica secured a multi-million-dollar research grant for the cardiology department. She's incredibly connected. Veronica said the funniest thing at the board meeting today. She has such a sharp, witty mind. Veronica Summers in the Hamptons. She understands the kind of lifestyle that comes with this level of success. Veronica understands the pressures of my world. I tried to bring it up once, a few months after we moved. We were eating a silent dinner, takeout from an expensive Thai place he liked, at our new, cold, glass dining table. "Brendan," I began, my voice hesitant. "You talk about Veronica a lot." His face darkened instantly. "She's a colleague, Chloe. A professional contact. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're insecure and paranoid. You don't understand how the professional world works. This is why I can't bring you to events. You're too small-minded. Small-minded. After everything I'd sacrificed, after giving up my education, my friends, my health, I was small-minded for noticing my husband's obvious obsession with another woman. The whiplash was stunning. The man who had once called me his rock now called me small-minded. The final nail in the coffin of our marriage was our 8th wedding anniversary. It fell on a chilly Tuesday in October. I had been planning for weeks, saving every spare dollar from my tips, hiding the money in a coffee can in the back of the pantry. I wanted one perfect evening. One night where we could remember who we used to be, the 2 kids in the cramped apartment, eating burgers and dreaming big. One night to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I left my cashier shift early, losing half a day's pay, so I could prepare. I went to the specialty grocery store and bought ingredients for Brendan's favorite meal, chicken parmesan with homemade marinara, just like I used to make in our old kitchen with the stuck cabinet. I found unscented pillar candles at the dollar store and set them on our cold glass dining table. I wore the emerald green dress from his graduation, the nicest thing I owned. I spent an hour on my hair and makeup, trying to recreate the look I'd seen on Cynthia, Thomas's wife. The table looked beautiful, simple, but filled with intention. I'd even splurged on a small, fancy chocolate cake from the patisserie downstairs. Happy Anniversary was written on it in elegant, white script. I kept checking my phone. Brendan's shift at the hospital ended at 6 p.m. It was 6:30. Then 7 o'clock. Then 7:30. The candles burned lower. At 8 o'clock, I texted him, "Are you coming home soon?" I made dinner. It's our anniversary. At 8:30, he replied, "Stuck at hospital. Emergency consultation. Don't wait up." My heart sank, but I tried to be understanding. He was a surgeon. Emergencies happened. People's lives were at stake. I covered the food with foil and kept the candles lit, their warm glow a defiance against the cold, dark windows. At 9:45, the apartment door finally opened. Brendan walked in, but he wasn't wearing his scrubs or his white coat. He was wearing one of his expensive navy blue suits, a crisp white shirt underneath, and he smelled strongly of cologne and something else, a faint, floral, expensive perfume that wasn't mine. "Hey," he said, barely glancing at me or the beautifully set table as he walked past toward the bedroom. "Brendan," I said softly, my voice trembling. "I made dinner. It's our anniversary." He stopped walking and turned around slowly, as if he'd forgotten I was there. His eyes moved over the table, the candles now burned halfway down, the covered dishes, the cake with its perfect script. There was no warmth in his gaze, only impatience. "Chloe, I told you I was stuck at the hospital. You should have just eaten." "You're wearing a suit," I said, the words feeling thick and stupid in my mouth. "Not scrubs." His jaw tightened. I had to change for a meeting afterward. A professional obligation. On our anniversary? The question was a whisper, a plea. "Some things are more important than dinner, Chloe." More important than our anniversary? More important than 8 years of marriage? I felt something vital crack inside my chest. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, breaking. "Just sit with me for a few minutes. The food's still warm. We can have some cake." "I'm not hungry," he interrupted, his voice flat and final. "I ate already. At the meeting." He walked to the bedroom. I stood there in my dollar store dress, looking at the table, at the ghost of the evening I had so carefully, hopefully prepared. The candles flickered, their light now seeming pathetic. The food was getting cold. My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. I would not let him see me break. Not over this. Not anymore. I followed him to the bedroom. He was unbuttoning his shirt, his back to me. "Brendan, we need to talk." "Not now, Grace. I'm exhausted." He hadn't called me Grace in years. It was a slip, a Freudian dismissal of my very identity. "We never talk anymore." The words burst out of me, louder than I intended. "You're always at the hospital or out with colleagues. Or with Veronica." He spun around, his eyes flashing with the anger I hadn't seen before. "Or what?" he shot back, his voice sharp and loud. "Say it. You think I'm doing something wrong? You think I'm having an affair? I think you're forgetting about us. About our marriage. About everything we've been through together." He laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound, it was a harsh, ugly bark. "Everything we've been through? Chloe, I'm the one who went through medical school. I'm the one who studied for years, who works 16-hour shifts, who's actually building a career, a reputation. What have you done? You punched a clock. You served coffee. That's not sacrifice. That's just having a job. The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing with sickening precision. I felt the air leave my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I worked 3 jobs so you could study. I cried, my voice shaking with rage and hurt. I gave up my education. I gave up everything. No one asked you to. His voice was a roar now, filling the sterile bedroom. That was your choice, Chloe. Your decision. I never forced you to drop out of school. You made yourself into a martyr, and now you want me to be grateful forever? To constantly genuflect before the altar of your sacrifice? That's not how life works. That's not how my life works anymore. I stood there, frozen, my body numb. This man, this stranger in expensive clothes standing in our $1 million view bedroom, couldn't be the same person who used to hold me and promise me forever. Brandon, I whispered, the fight gone out of me, replaced by a hollow, ringing emptiness. What happened to you? He sat on the edge of our king-sized bed, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. When he looked up at me, his eyes were cold, distant, devoid of any love or even fond memory. I grew up, Chloe, he said, his voice now quiet, which was somehow worse than the yelling. I evolved. I'm not that scared kid in a cramped apartment anymore. I'm a surgeon at one of the best hospitals in the country. I have colleagues who respect me, opportunities opening up, a future that's actually going somewhere. He paused, his gaze sweeping over me, from my simple, now wilted dress to my tired face. And you, he said, the single word dripping with contempt. You're still the same girl from 8 years ago. You haven't grown. You haven't changed. You're still working at Save Mart, still waiting tables, still living like we're poor when we're not anymore. You're stuck in the past, and I'm moving toward the future. I'm working those jobs to help us save money, to contribute. I don't need your contribution, he stood up, his voice rising again. I don't need your discount store clothes or your homemade dinners or your constant, tired face reminding me of where I came from. Do you know what Veronica said to me last week? She said I seemed weighed down, like I was carrying something heavy. And she's right. I am carrying something heavy. This marriage. You. Veronica, I breathed, the name a curse on my lips. Always Veronica. Are you sleeping with her? He didn't even flinch. Does it matter? He shot back. Would it change anything? Grace, look at yourself. Look at your hands, your clothes, your entire life. You're simple. You're limited. You belong in a world of coupons and coffee stains. Veronica understands ambition. She understands success. She belongs in my world. He shook his head slowly, a final, devastating verdict. And you, he said, his voice dropping to a cruel, quiet finality. You don't. I stood there, frozen, as he walked to the walk-in closet and pulled out a suitcase, the same one we'd taken on our one and only, budget honeymoon to a beach cabin. What are you doing? I asked, though I already knew. The numbness was spreading. I've been thinking about this for months, he said, not looking at me as he started packing his expensive shirts, his tailored pants. We're not compatible anymore. We want different things. We're different people. This is over. Because I'm not rich, I said, my voice flat. Because I'm not sophisticated enough for your new friends. He stopped packing and looked at me directly, his eyes devoid of any warmth or remorse. Because your simplicity disgusts me, Chloe. The way you think, the way you dress, the way you live, it's all so small and limited and beneath what I deserve now. You're not worthy of the life I've built. Not worthy. After 6 years of sacrifice, after giving up everything, after loving him with every shattered piece of my heart, I was not worthy. I want a divorce, he said, zipping up the suitcase with a definitive sound. I'll have my lawyer contact you with the details. You can stay here for another month while you figure out where to go. After that, I'm selling the place. He walked toward the door, then paused, his hand on the knob. He didn't look back. For what it's worth, Chloe, he said, his voice devoid of emotion, I did appreciate what you did back then. But that was a long time ago, and gratitude doesn't build a future. I'm sorry you can't see that. Then he left. The door clicked shut behind him, a soft, final sound. I stood alone in the vast, silent bedroom, hearing the echo of the front door closing, hearing the faint ding of the elevator taking him away. The candles in the dining room had burned out, leaving trails of wax on the glass table. The anniversary dinner sat untouched, a memorial to a love that had died long before tonight. 8 years of my life had just walked out the door, taking what was left of my heart with him. The days after Brandon left blurred together into a monochrome smear of pain. I went to work, I came home, I stared at the walls of the luxurious, cold apartment. I moved through my shifts at Save Mart and the diner like an automaton, my smile a rigid, painted-on mask for the customers. I didn't cry at first. I think I was too shocked, too hollowed out. It felt like someone had reached into my chest, scooped out everything that made me human, my heart, my dreams, my memories, and left just a hollow shell that knew how to skin groceries and pour coffee. The official divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by a bored-looking courier. I sat on the cold, concrete floor of the living room, we never did buy a rug, and read through the sterile, legal language. The terms were even more brutal than I had anticipated. Brandon, through his lawyer Mr. Thorne, was offering a final settlement of $15,000. The document cited my lack of substantial financial contribution and failure to develop professionally during the marriage. It stated that all assets acquired post-medical school, the apartment, the BMW, his retirement accounts, his investments, were the direct result of his singular effort and professional standing and were therefore his alone. The $15,000 was described as a gesture of goodwill to assist in her transition to independence. Independence. That word again. The same word he'd used to keep me working while he lived his new life. Now, it was being used to abandon me with nothing. I was to get nothing else. No claim to the life I had funded, no acknowledgement of the 6 years I had poured into him. According to the black and white words on the page, I hadn't built anything. I'd just been there, a ghost in the background, pleasant but ultimately irrelevant. I looked at myself in the vast, mirrored wall of the bathroom that night. I was 28 years old, but I looked a decade older. My face was pale and drawn, the skin seeming to sag from the bones. My hands, resting on the cold marble countertop, were permanently rough, the skin dry and cracked no matter how much lotion I used, a topographical map of my sacrifice. My shoulders were permanently curved forward from exhaustion and the weight of invisible burdens. My eyes, which had once sparkled with hope and love, were flat and dead, all the light extinguished. I had given the best years of my life, my youth, my health, my very identity, to a man who had thrown me away like garbage. For the first time since Brandon had walked out, the dam broke. I didn't just cry, I broke down completely. I slid down the cabinet to the cold tile floor and sobbed. Deep, ugly, guttural sobs that ripped from a place of such profound pain I didn't know a person could survive it. I cried for the bright-eyed, 20-year-old girl who had believed in love so fiercely she was willing to bet her future on it. I cried for the thousands of small sacrifices that had meant nothing. I cried for the 6 years of my life I would never, ever get back. I cried until I was empty, until there was nothing left but the hollow, aching shell and the chilling certainty that he had been right. I was nothing. That's where Maggie found me 3 hours later. She'd used the emergency key I'd given her years ago after I'd locked myself out. She'd called a dozen times, and when I didn't answer, she came. She took one look at me, a crumpled, weeping heap on the expensive bathroom floor, and her own face crumpled in sympathy and rage. She didn't say a word. She just sat down on the floor beside me, gathered me into her arms, and held me while I shook. When my tears finally subsided into ragged hiccups, she spoke, her voice quiet but fierce. "He is destroying you, Chloe. And we are not going to let him win." I pulled back, wiping my raw, swollen face with the back of my hand. "Win what, Maggie? Look at me. No degree, no career, no savings, no future. He's right. I have nothing." Maggie grabbed my shoulders, her grip firm, forcing me to look into her determined eyes. "You have the truth," she said, her voice low and intense. "And the truth is a weapon more powerful than all his money and all his lies. He thinks you're just a cashier. He thinks you're simple. He has forgotten who he was dealing with. He has forgotten the woman who outworked, outplanned, and outendured everyone for 6 straight years. We are going to remind him." Over the next 3 weeks, Maggie worked with a ferocious, focused energy I had never seen before. She officially became my lawyer, drawing up the paperwork and entering her appearance in the case. When I tried to talk about payment, she shut me down. "You'll pay me back someday when you're a fancy businesswoman and I need a loan. Right now, we have work to do. This isn't about money anymore, Chloe. This is about justice." And so, we began to build our case. It was like assembling a mosaic from a million shattered pieces of our former life. First, she subpoenaed my bank records from the past 8 years. Every single statement, from every account I'd ever held. The data was a brutal, unassailable ledger of my sole financial support. Line by line, transaction by transaction, it told the story: rent $1,200. Electric bill $187. Northwood Medical Bookstore $650. Brandon's suit for clinicals $300. For 6 years, my deposits from SaveMart, the Midnight Grill, and CleanCo offices were the only consistent income. Brandon's deposits were sporadic, tiny amounts from his library job that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. Then, Maggie went after the paper trail of our life. She tracked down all 5 of our old apartment leases. Every single one was signed only by me. His credit was shot from the student loans, I explained. The landlords would only accept my application. She tracked down old neighbors who gave statements remembering the nice, quiet girl who was always coming or going to work. She found the boxes of receipts I'd compulsively saved in the back of the storage closet, not out of meticulousness, but out of a deep-seated fear of not having enough. Receipts for textbooks, for stethoscopes, for his laptop, for the professional shoes he needed. All paid for by my debit card. Then, she found the key. The one Brandon had forgotten entirely. "Chloe," she said one evening, her voice tight with excitement. She was surrounded by piles of paper, her laptop glowing in the dim light of my kitchen. "Do you remember Brandon's 3rd year of medical school? That crisis month when his student loan was delayed and his tuition payment was about to bounce? He was going to be dropped from the program." I nodded slowly. It had been one of the most terrifying months of my life. Brandon had been a wreck, pale and unable to eat or sleep. His dream was literally hours from being revoked. "You went to First National Bank," Maggie prompted. "You took out a personal loan." "A $45,000 loan," I whispered, the memory sharp and clear. The bank manager said I had decent credit from all the bill paying, but it was a huge risk. They required a cosigner, but Brandon's credit was maxed out. It was all on me. "And Brandon," Maggie said, her eyes gleaming, signed a promissory note. He put it in writing. He acknowledged the debt and promised to repay you once he finished his residency and got a job. My heart started to beat a wild, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I think I still have it. It's in one of these boxes, I think. With all the other old paperwork. We tore through the storage boxes like women possessed, until finally, buried beneath old tax returns and expired warranties, we found it. A simple, one-page document. A promissory note from Brandon Pierce to Chloe Morrison for the sum of $45,000, with a repayment schedule to begin upon the successful completion of my medical residency and acquisition of full-time employment. His signature was at the bottom, bold and confident, a relic from a time when he still saw me as his partner, his savior. Maggie held the paper up to the light as if it were a holy relic. He forgot about this, she breathed. In his new, fancy life, he completely forgot about this piece of paper. But legally, Chloe, this is gold. This is a direct, documented, unpaid financial investment in his medical degree. This single piece of paper blows his entire no financial contribution argument out of the water. But Maggie wasn't done. She was building a fortress, and she wanted a moat filled with sharks. She subpoenaed Brandon's financial records, his bank accounts, his investment portfolios, everything. And that's when we found the final, damning piece of evidence. The one that made my stomach twist with a fresh, sickening wave of betrayal. 3 months before Brandon had asked me for a divorce, he had liquidated $75,000 from a joint investment account, an account that had been initially funded with my years of savings and his first signing bonus, and transferred it to an entity listed as Ash Pharmaceuticals LLC. The memo line on the transfer read, Seed Investment. The registered agent for Ash Pharmaceuticals LLC was Veronica Ashford. He used marital money, Maggie explained, her voice cold with fury. Money that, by law, is half yours. He used it, without your knowledge or consent, to invest in his girlfriend's company. That's not just infidelity, Chloe. That's called dissipation of marital assets. It's a huge no-no in divorce court. The judge is going to rip him a new one for this. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I paced the empty, echoing apartment, my nerves stretched to their breaking point. What if it doesn't work? I asked Maggie, who was camped out on my couch, reviewing her notes for the 100th time. What if the judge is like all the others? What if she thinks I'm just a bitter, scorned woman trying to take what she didn't earn? Maggie looked up, and a slow, confident smile spread across her face. Trust me, she said. When judges see evidence this clear, this brazen, they react. And Judge Henderson. I've done my research on her. She worked her way through night school while raising 2 kids after her own divorce. She's famous in legal circles for having zero tolerance for powerful men who forget where they came from and who helped them get there. She's the perfect judge for this. She'll see right through him. The morning of the hearing, I put on the same navy blue dress I'd worn to Brandon's graduation. Not because it was nice, but because I wanted him to see it. I wanted the sight of that dress to trigger a flicker of memory, a ghost of shame. I wanted him to look at the woman he'd found disgusting and be forced to watch her stand up for herself. In the courthouse hallway, surrounded by the nervous energy of other people's crumbling lives, Maggie handed me the heavy manila envelope. Inside was our entire case. The loan documents, the promissory note, the 8 years of bank statements, the evidence of the $75,000 transfer, the witness statements, the lease agreements, everything. It was the physical manifestation of my truth. When the moment is right, she said, her hand on my arm, you stand up, you walk to that bench, and you hand this to Judge Henderson. You look her in the eye. And Chloe. She smiled. Keep your head up. You've already won, even if you don't know it yet. We walked into that courtroom together. I sat at the table, my hands folded over the envelope, trying to breathe through the panic. Brandon sat across from me, looking untouchable and impatient. His lawyer, Mr. Thorne, delivered his opening volley, painting me as a lazy, unambitious drain and Brandon as a self-made hero. He talked about my low-skilled jobs and my minimal contribution. And then, Maggie gave me the nod. I stood up. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I walked to Judge Henderson's bench, my heart pounding a deafening rhythm in my ears. I handed her the truth. I met her eyes for a second, a flash of steel and intelligence, and then I walked back to my seat and waited. I watched her face change as she read. I watched her eyebrows rise in surprise, her eyes widen in disbelief. I watched her lips press together as she fought a smile, and then I watched her lose that battle spectacularly. Her laughter, genuine and shocked, echoed in the room, and it was the most beautiful, validating sound I had ever heard. The reckoning had begun. Judge Henderson's laughter faded, but the electric atmosphere it created only intensified. She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, her smile hardening into a look of severe, icy judgment. "Mr. Pierce," she began, her voice like chipped marble. "Your attorney stood before this court and stated, under the solemnity of these proceedings, that your wife made no direct financial investment in your education." She held up the promissory note. "Would you care to explain this?" Brandon's face was a sickly shade of gray. He leaned forward, squinting. That was a personal arrangement between my wife and me. Years ago. It has nothing to do with asset division." "A personal arrangement?" Judge Henderson's voice dripped with sarcasm so thick you could almost see it. "This is a legally executed promissory note for $45,000, taken out in your wife's name alone, for which she was solely liable, used to pay your medical school tuition at a critical juncture. You signed it, acknowledging the debt. That, Mr. Pierce, is the very definition of a direct financial investment. It has everything to do with this." Brandon's lawyer, Mr. Thorne, shot to his feet. "Your Honor, even if this debt exists, its settlement is a separate matter from." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge commanded, and he sank back into his chair as if his bones had turned to liquid. She then proceeded to systematically, methodically, and publicly dismantle Brandon's entire world. She read aloud from my bank statements, her voice a calm, relentless drumbeat of truth that filled the silent courtroom. July, rent payment, $1,200, from Chloe Morrison's account. August, withdrawal for medical textbooks B. Pierce, $650, from Chloe Morrison's account. September, utility bill, $187, from Chloe Morrison's account. On and on it went, a 6-year-long, unbroken chain of my sole financial support. She read the old text messages Maggie had excavated from an old phone. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Chloe. You're my rock. I'll repay you for all of this 1,000 times over." Hearing his own forgotten words of gratitude and promise read back to him in this setting made Brandon flinch as if he'd been physically struck. Then she got to the final piece of evidence. Her expression shifted from stern to openly disgusted. "Mr. Pierce," she said, holding up the bank transfer record as if it were something foul. 3 months prior to filing for divorce, you liquidated $75,000 from a joint investment account, an account funded largely by your wife's years of labor and your first bonus, and transferred it to Ms. Veronica Ashford for her business venture, Ash Pharmaceuticals. You did this without your wife's knowledge, without her consent, while you were, by your own admission, romantically involved with the recipient. Do you deny this? Brendan's eyes darted toward the gallery where Veronica sat, her face now a frozen mask of sheer panic. "It was an investment," he stammered, his voice losing its polished baritone. "A sound business decision. A sound business decision made with marital assets, hidden from your spouse," Judge Henderson clarified, her tone dropping to a deadly calm. "That is not a business decision, Mr. Pierce. That is financial misconduct. That is dissipation of marital assets. And in this court, it weighs very, very heavily in my deliberations." She set the papers down with a definitive thud and folded her hands, looking from Brendan's ashen, crumbling face to my calm, resolved one. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, her voice low and powerful, carrying to every corner of the rapt courtroom. "Your wife, Mr. Pierce, did not punch a clock. She built the very clock you used to time your success. She laid the foundation, mixed the concrete, and raised the walls of the career you so proudly claim as your own solitary achievement. She sacrificed her education, her health, and her youth. And your repayment was to call her simple, to cast her aside as unworthy, and to secretly give her money to another woman. The arrogance and ingratitude you have displayed today are, frankly, staggering. She paused, letting the weight of her words crush the last vestiges of Brandon's composure. He looked like a little boy who had been caught in a monstrous lie, small and scared in his expensive suit. "Here is my ruling," Judge Henderson announced, and the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. First, the promissory note is upheld and enforceable. You will repay Chloe Morrison the principal of $45,000, plus statutory interest accrued over the last 4 years, for a total of $63,000, payable within 30 days. Second, regarding the division of assets. Ms. Morrison is awarded 50% of all marital assets acquired during the marriage. This includes half the current net value of your River District apartment, half of your 401k and investment portfolios, and half of any other holdings. My preliminary calculations, based on the financials provided, place the value of her share at approximately $300,000. Third, spousal support. Given the direct and overwhelming evidence of Ms. Morrison's sacrifice of her own earning potential for your benefit, I am awarding compensatory spousal support in the amount of $4,000 per month for a period of 6 years. This is to compensate her for the income she lost by abandoning her education and to allow her to return to school and establish her own career. Fourth, the $75,000 you dissipated by transferring it to Ms. Ashford is to be returned to the marital estate immediately. It will then be divided equally, meaning Ms. Morrison will receive $37,500 from that sum. She looked directly at Brendan, her gaze unwavering, a force of nature delivering a long overdue storm. By my final calculation, Ms. Morrison will be walking out of this marriage with approximately $450,000 in immediate assets and ongoing support. You, Mr. Pierce, will walk away with a lesson I sincerely hope you learn. Success built on the back of another's sacrifice is not yours alone to claim. You owed her everything, and you offered her nothing. This court is now correcting that grave injustice. We are adjourned. The crack of the gavel was the sweetest, most resonant sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of freedom. The sound of justice. The courtroom erupted into a buzz of excited chatter. Brandon exploded out of his chair. "This is insane," he yelled, his voice cracking, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She was just a cashier. She didn't pass the exams. She didn't do the surgeries. She didn't. She made it possible." Judge Henderson roared, slamming her gavel down again with terrifying force. The vibration shot through the table and up my arms. Every single hour she worked, every single dollar she earned, every single dream she put in a box for you, that is what built your career. The fact that you are still too blind to see that only proves she is infinitely better off without you. Court is adjourned. Maggie wrapped me in a bone-crushing hug, laughing and crying at the same time. "You did it. You did it, Chloe." As we gathered our things, the world seemed brighter, sharper. The hum of the fluorescent lights was now a chorus of victory. I heard the commotion outside the courtroom doors. Brandon and Veronica were on the courthouse steps, their carefully constructed facades completely shattered. "This is a disaster," Veronica hissed, her elegant composure gone, replaced by a sharp, furious panic. "You told me she was a nobody. You said she would just go away with a few $1,000s. Now I have to return $75,000? Do you have any idea what this will do to my company's credibility? The investors will flee. Veronica, please, just calm down. We can fix this," Brendan pleaded, his voice desperate, his hand reaching for her arm. "Fix it? Fix you," she spat, pulling her arm away as if his touch were acid. "I am not attaching my name or my company's reputation to this humiliating train wreck. We're done. Don't call me again." She turned on her heel and marched away, her expensive heels clicking a staccato rhythm of finality on the stone steps. Brendan stood alone, watching her go, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. His lawyer was beside him, speaking in low, urgent tones, likely explaining the futility and exorbitant cost of an appeal. The triumphant Dr. Pierce who had entered the courthouse was gone. In his place was a man who had been forced to see the reflection of his own ugly, grasping truth, and he was crumbling into dust under the weight of it. 6 months later, I was sitting in a bright, airy classroom at Oakwood Community College, a textbook open in front of me. The scent of old paper, fresh coffee, and possibility was intoxicating. I was back in school, pursuing a degree in business administration, and I was not just attending, I was thriving. My first semester grades had come back, straight A's and a coveted spot on the dean's list. The congratulatory email from my professor felt more validating than any praise I'd ever received. I had paid off every cent of my personal debt. I had moved out of the Cold River District apartment and into a cozy, light-filled one-bedroom in a friendly neighborhood with trees and families. It was small, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every rug, every plant, I had chosen for myself. I had gained back the weight I'd lost, and the permanent shadows of exhaustion under my eyes had finally faded. I'd even treated myself to a proper haircut and highlights at a nice salon. For the first time in nearly a decade, I looked in the mirror and saw me. Not Brendan's wife, not the long-suffering supporter, just Chloe. Stronger, wiser, quieter, and finally, utterly free. Maggie met me for coffee at a little independent shop near campus to celebrate my Dean's List achievement. She slid a small, gift-wrapped box across the table. "For the academic superstar," she said, her eyes shining with pride. Inside was a beautiful, high-quality leather-bound journal and a fountain pen. "For all the new dreams," she explained. I laughed, a genuine, easy sound that came from a place of contentment. "I don't know about superstar, but I'm thinking about getting my MBA after this. Maybe start my own small business consulting firm one day. Help other small businesses tell their stories." "You will," she said with unwavering certainty. "I know you will." She stirred her latte, then looked at me seriously. "So, how are you, really?" I took a moment, sipping my coffee, looking out the window at the students hurrying to class. "I'm at peace," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. For so long, I thought my value was what I could do for someone else. I made myself small, quiet, and accommodating so he could feel big, important, and successful. When he left, I thought I was nothing because I had nothing to show for myself. But I was wrong. I looked down at my hands, which were still a little rough, but were healing, slowly becoming my own again. I was always enough. I was resilient, I was loyal, I was a hell of a hard worker. I just forgot that I was the one who mattered. My dreams mattered. My peace mattered. My happiness mattered. I don't need someone else to build a legacy for me. I can build my own. Walking home from the cafe, my new journal tucked safely in my bag, I passed the gleaming, imposing facade of Metropolitan Elite Hospital. I saw doctors in white coats moving with purpose through the lobby. Somewhere in that building, Brendan was working, living the life he had chosen over me, over us. I stopped for a moment, not with pain or anger or even curiosity, but with a profound sense of closure. I felt nothing for him. No hatred, no love, no lingering connection. Just the quiet, final acknowledgement of a chapter that was closed, its lessons learned, its pain transmuted into strength. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email from the University Financial Aid Office. I had been awarded the Phoenix Scholarship, a full tuition grant created for non-traditional students who had overcome significant adversity to continue their education. A slow, deep, genuine smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of victory over Brendan, but a smile of affirmation for myself. I put my phone away, tucked my textbook under my arm, and kept walking toward my apartment, toward my classes, toward my future. I spent 6 years building someone else's dream, pouring my everything into a foundation that turned out to be sand. Now, I was building my own. And this time, the foundation was solid, unshakable, and built entirely on my own worth, my own resilience, and my own terms. And that was enough. That was everything. And that, everyone, is the story of Chloe Morrison. A story that proves that your sacrifices have value, your silence has a limit, and your worth is not for anyone else to decide. It's a reminder that even in your darkest moment, when you feel you have nothing left, you still have the truth. And the truth is a weapon that can topple giants. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you chills or made you cheer for Chloe, then do me a huge favor, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story of courage and comeback. I have to ask one more time, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let them know that it's never too late to reclaim your story and build a future on your own terms. Thank you so much for watching, for caring, and for being part of this incredible community. Remember, no matter what you're going through, your story isn't over yet. It's just waiting for you to turn the page. Until next time.